Hello, Moonshines. So this is going to be a bit different. This is technically supposed to be Nari's part to read, but things have been hectic and busy for him, so currently I am recording this to upload, and the video will be swapped to his recording once I have it. But this way the chapter is out for you guys to hear. The fog-shrouded basin was quiet that morning. Not silent. Never silent. But still. The kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from things holding their breath. Nestled in a bed of moss and old, worn cloth scraps lay a single egg. It was smooth and pale, dusted with a film of fog so fine it never fully dried. Dew gathered along its surface, but never dripped, as though the moisture clung to it purposefully. A twitch, then stillness again. On the crooked windowsill of a stone ruin nearby, Trapeze sat with her legs dangling, motionless as a puppet. A single red thread hung loose from the frayed edge of her shadowy form, swaying in the moist air. A shepherd nearby said nothing, though it tilted its head toward the egg in quiet interest. Another twitch, this time followed by a muffled tap. Trapeze didn't rise. She didn't need to. The egg rocked gently, then stilled once more. Tap, tap. The third sound came with a faint hairline fracture, barely visible, trailing up one side like a question mark. And then, a soft pop, barely audible over the fog-muffled world. A tiny paw slipped free, followed by another. Cracks branched like frost over a window pane. The shell crumbled inward, and the newborn tumbled into the nest with a soft thud, fur clinging to his form. He was small, even for an Eevee. His fur was a light, dusty brown, fluff-matted and thin. His legs trembled as he tried to stand, but gave up, curling instead into the warmth of the nest he'd barely left. Trapeze tilted her head, slowly. Then the newborn opened his eyes. They were wide, unfocused at first, like all newborns. But slowly, the haze cleared. His gaze met hers, not sharp or searching, just aware. His eyes were not like other Eevee kits. They were a pale, misty purple, soft but striking, like fog catching sunrise before the sun. The shepherd crept closer, but the Eevee didn't flinch, didn't cry, just blinked, and blinked again. Trapeze murmured, her voice barely louder than the breeze. She finally floated down from her perch, slow and weightless, letting her claws hover just above the ground. She knelt beside the nest and watched him for a moment longer, inspecting the way he didn't squirm, didn't mewl, just stared. "You're quiet," she said softly. "I like that." The Eevee blinked again, then let out the softest, rasping yawn. Trapeze allowed herself a rare, tiny smile. The fog drifted between them like breath. The fog never cleared for long. Even when the wind stirred, it only pulled the mist into longer tendrils, curling through the ruined pillars like smoke from a forgotten fire. Storm sat at the edge of the old shrine's stone platform, his tiny paws tucked under him, ears sagging to either side like damp cloth. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He simply stared out into the mist, wide purple eyes blinking slow, as though watching something no one else could see. Behind him, Trapeze drifted, not in the way others might. She didn't hover, or pace, or fidget. She simply was, a weightless shadow, a whisper stitched into the air. A shepherd bobbed quietly by her shoulder, its cloth body rippling as though listening to something far away. Storm's tail gave a small flick. Not of irritation, not even awareness, just acknowledgement. Trapeze moved closer, her steps making no sound as she crossed to sit beside him. She didn't speak. She rarely did. Words, she'd learned, often said far less than silence. Storm turned his head just enough to glance at her, blinking once, slowly. "You're not afraid," she murmured. It wasn't a compliment, not quite a question, just something observed, spoken into the fog where it wouldn't echo. Storm didn't answer. He couldn't, not with words. But his ears twitched, a lazy arc of one folding over as if in thought. A shadow slithered near the outer ring of the ruins. Not a real one, Trapeze would have noticed, but something like a shadow. A trick of light and fog. Most Pokemon would have flinched, or looked for the source. Storm simply watched it pass, eyes wide, head tilted just so. Curious. She studied him. His stillness wasn't born of fear or weakness. It was presence, awareness. Like he knew how to make himself small, not because he felt small, but because he chose to be. Quiet, watchful, like her. The shepherd drifted closer to him, and this time he did shift. His tiny paw reached up to bat gently at the trailing edge of its cloth. No squeals, no cries, just fascination, testing, touching. When the shepherd spun once, playful, Storm turned a slow circle in place and mirrored it, stumbling only once. Trapeze's mouth curved, barely. Not a smile, but something like it. "He likes you," she said to the shepherd. "That's rare." The ghost bobbed once, then floated in a slow figure 8, as if inviting the Eevee into its path. Storm didn't hesitate. He followed, tiny paws nearly silent against the mossy stone. The mist curled around his legs, but he didn't notice. Trapeze stood there where she was, arms crossed loosely, watching as the shepherd led him between the leaning stones and half-buried rubble. He never stayed far, always circling back toward her, even if he never actually looked in her direction when he did. She didn't call him, didn't stop him. He knew she was there, and that was enough. The fog had come early that morning, thicker than usual, curling in heavy loops that clung to the ground like old memories. Storm had already vanished. Not lost, not even hiding, just gone, the way he sometimes was. The fog had learned not to resist him. It parted around his fur like a second skin, accepting him in a way it did no one else. Trapeze knew better than to chase. Instead, she sat in the crumbling stone ring of the basin's old altar, her zippers half drawn and her eyes narrow, tracking the shifting mist. A whisper drifted past. Not wind, not voice. Something in between. The shepherd beside her perked up. She raised a hand, stopping it from going after him. Let him come back on his own. He always did. And then, without sound, he was there. Storm reappeared beside one of the fractured stones, head tilted, eyes glowing faintly purple beneath the shroud of mist. His fur was dusty but dry, his paws caked with mossy dirt, a fragment of bone dangling from his mouth. Old and polished like river stone, he dropped it at Trapeze's feet. Where did you find that? She asked, voice quiet. Storm blinked, slowly. His ears drooped and flared slightly, the way they always did when he didn't want to answer. Whether it was because he couldn't or wouldn't, Trapeze had never figured out. She picked up the bone and turned it in her claws. Something had carved spirals into the side. Not recently. The shepherd behind her drifted a little closer to Storm, then began circling him in slow, lazy loops. He didn't bat at it like before. This time, he followed the rhythm, moving when it moved, pausing when it paused. They circled each other, like mirrors. Trapeze watched without comment. Instead, she addressed him again. You wandered past the grove. Storm's tail twitched once, like the flick of a candle. Then he sat down and stared at her. Not defiant, not guilty, just waiting. You're not supposed to go alone, she added. He opened his mouth, not to speak. He never spoke, but a faint huff of air escaped, like an imitation of a sigh he'd heard before. His ears drooped forward this time, folding almost entirely over his face like a curtain. Trapeze drifted toward him and lowered herself beside him, reaching out slowly. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He leaned into the motion, pressing against her shadowy form as if she were made of warmth and not ethereal thread. You scare them when you do that, she whispered. Storm blinked. The spirits follow you too easily. A pause. The shepherd stopped circling and settled beside him, one eye still trained on something just behind him. Something Trapeze couldn't see, though she felt it. But Storm could. He looked over his shoulder. His expression didn't change, but his tail curled inward slightly. Don't let them follow you back next time, Trapeze said, almost gently. Not all of them are kind. Storm didn't nod, but his posture shifted in a way she'd learned to read. A quiet yes. She let silence stretch between them, then ran her claws gently over his back. Once. Slowly. He curled in tighter, burying his nose against her side. Even if his eyes stayed open, watching the mist, Storm's breath was slow and even. His body pressed against Trapeze's side, not for warmth, not for comfort, but for anchoring. She knew the difference. He was not afraid of the dark, or the fog, or even the spirits that flickered at the edge of perception. But sometimes, even a child of shadow needs something real to lean against. The shepherd resting nearby bobbed once, then twice, slowly, not at Storm, behind him. Trapeze's eyes narrowed. She looked past the child, through the mist. There was a ripple in the air, like breath caught in glass. Don't turn around, she said softly. Storm blinked. His ears twitched, but he obeyed. The air behind him bent. It shouldn't have. There was no wind, no heat, no presence, but something wanted in. Storm's fur lifted slightly along his spine, and his gaze unfocused. He was looking sideways now, through the fog, not into it, as though seeing a shape his body hadn't quite caught up to. Yet, then, it happened. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, his outline blurred, not with motion, not with speed, with absence. His form seemed to waver, like a reflection caught in a ripple. The stone beneath his paws was briefly visible through him. His shadow vanished entirely. Then he was whole again. Storm blinked, then looked down at his paws. His expression didn't change, but Trapeze felt the shift. Not in the air, but in the space around him. She leaned down, claws barely brushing his ear. "That wasn't them," she murmured. Storm turned his head toward her. "That was you." The Shepherd let out a low, curious spiraling in a slow, playful drift. Storm followed it again, this time with more certainty. His steps were light, almost too quiet. Trapeze rose and floated beside him. Her gaze stayed on him, not with worry, but with careful attention, the kind a ghost gives to something that shouldn't yet be able to touch its world. "You're beginning to fade," she said, more to herself than him. "You haven't even learned how." Storm suddenly turned, facing her directly, his wide, mist-hued eyes locked with hers. Then, as if trying to mirror what he'd just done, he squinted and went still. He strained. Nothing happened. Trapeze almost smiled. "It's not something you force," she said. "You listen. You feel for the space between places. You let it take you. Just a little." Storm's ears flicked toward her voice, absorbing every syllable like they were the only words he'd ever heard. His tail curled again, and for the first time, he let out a noise, a very soft, dry giggle. It was strange, half air, half echo. It chilled even the Shuppet, who spun once and ducked beneath Trapeze's arm. Storm sat again, pleased with himself. Trapeze knelt before him, steadying his eyes. The violet in them had deepened, no longer just color, but depth, like staring into fog you knew wasn't empty. "You're not like other children," she whispered, brushing his fur back from his eyes. He blinked, then leaned forward until his head gently bumped against her chest. She let him rest there, wrapping her arms lightly around him. Not as a cradle, but a veil. One ghost, one child, and the fog that knew them both. The fog in the basin had thickened again, curling like smoke around the shrine's broken stones. The only light came from the silvered moon ahead, filtered so faintly through the mist that it looked more like a hole in the sky than a star. Storm stood at the edge of the shrine platform. He was a little taller now, a little sure of his paws, but still quiet, still made of breath and watchfulness. He watched the mist drift between the trees, his violet eyes tracing something unseen, shapes that flickered like stories just outside of reach. Behind him, Trapeze was mending something, thread pulled through soft cloth. One of the worn satchels that had once held his egg, frayed but never discarded. The Shuppet lay upside down on a broken pillar, spinning itself slowly like a leaf caught in the dream. Storm shifted. His tail curled close to his side. His head dipped, ears folding low. Trapeze paused. "You feel it again?" Storm blinked slowly. He turned his head, just slightly, enough to see her, not enough to meet her eyes. "The spirits are restless," she murmured. "They're watching you more." Storm looked down. A long pause. The kind of silence that carried weight, not emptiness. Then, "Why?" It came like a sigh, dry, soft, and real. Trapeze froze. The needle stopped halfway through its stitch. The thread pulled tight. Her claws trembled faintly, not from fear, but the kind of deep stillness that comes after a surprise you don't know how to feel yet. Storm didn't turn around. His tail twitched once, then again. She stood slowly, floated toward him in near silence. Her shadow fell beside his, but didn't touch. "You spoke," she said, voice as hushed as the fog. Storm didn't answer, so she asked again. "Why, what?" Another long silence. Then, quieter than before, more strained, like it cost him something. "Why do they follow?" Trapeze knelt beside him. For a long time she didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because it mattered how she said it. "They see themselves in you," she finally said. Storm's ears shifted slightly. "Not who you are now, who you will be, what you might become." Storm looked up at her at last. His eyes, deep violet and fog soft, shimmered faintly in the dim light. "They're loud." His voice wavered, more like breath than sound, but it was there. She reached out and touched his chest, right where the fur was thickest, where his heart pulsed slow and ready. "You don't have to listen to all of them," she said. "Only the ones you choose." Storm was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Like he was choosing silence rather than falling into it. He turned and pressed against her side again, burying his face into the fold of her long arms. Trapeze let her claws rest gently over him, her cloth-like body curling protectively in a loose spiral. "Storm," she murmured for the first time that night. "That's your name, but it's more than that." Storm peeked one eye up at her. "It's what you are, quiet but not still, gentle but powerful, and hard to hold." He gave a small, slow nod, and just before sleep took him, his voice came again, softer, one word. "Trapeze." His voice was fragile, like something stitched from mist and memory, but it was real. Trapeze didn't speak at first, didn't move, but something in her, deep, sealed away for years, softened. She reached down and cupped his tiny face in one cloth-wrapped claw, thumb brushing beneath one violet eye. Her grip was careful, not because he was delicate, but because his words had made something sacred of the moment. "You saved that," she murmured. "Didn't you?" Storm blinked slowly, then gave a small nod, barely noticeable, more a dip of his head than emotion. "Waited until it mattered," she said. "Good. That's how names should be used." The fog swirled gently around them, responding to the rhythm of their stillness. The shuppet nearby had gone quiet too, hanging from the branch of a fallen vine, like a half-closed eye. Even the restless spirits hovering at the edge of the ruins seemed to retreat, offering privacy to something they'd no doubt sensed coming long before it happened. Storm nestled closer again, fur brushing against her side, but this time his body relaxed fully, as if speaking her name had anchored something inside him. After a long pause, he whispered, "It feels strange." "What does?" "Being heard." Trapeze let out a sound, Not a laugh, not quite, but something low and rich and full of knowing. It always does at first, she said. Most souls drift their whole lives wanting to be seen, heard, named. You already are. Storm was quiet for a while after that, but she could tell his thoughts hadn't gone still. So she said, "You don't have to talk every day. You don't have to speak to everyone." Storm looked up at her. "But," she added, "when you choose to, let it mean something." His mouth moved slightly, just the edge of a question forming, unsure of if it belonged in the air yet. She answered it anyway. "Words are spells," she said, "even little ones, especially little ones. And you?" Her fingers brushed the tip of his ear, gently folding it back into place. "Will be a dangerous spellcaster one day." Storm's tail curled tight with pleasure, though he tried not to show it. Then he blinked again and asked with halting care, "Can I keep saying it?" "My name?" she asked. He nodded, eyes lowered, shy now that the moment had passed. Trapeze leaned down so her face was near his again, voice barely above the wind. "You may say it whenever your soul needs to." Storm looked at her for a long time after that. Then quietly, almost to himself, "Trapeze." This time, he didn't flinch after saying it. And from the shadows beyond the shrine, where the deeper ghosts watched from cracks in the stones, the mist curled a little tighter around him. Not threatening, protective, like the basin itself had heard.